Close your eyes, it's the year 1348. You've been accused of stealing bread, though you didn't. No trial, no hearing, just a shove, a clank of an iron door, and now darkness. The air smells of urine, rot, and unwashed bodies. You're thrown into a tiny stone cell with 4 others, 1 coughing blood, and 1 chained to the wall. The rats are the only ones free. Welcome to the medieval prison. To understand medieval prisons, we have to forget what we know about modern justice. These weren't institutions meant to reform criminals or protect society. They were tools used to hold, to threaten, to punish, and often to forget. In early medieval Europe, around the 9th to 11th century, there were hardly any prisons at all. Punishments were swift and brutal: execution, exile, mutilation. But by the 12th and 13th centuries, cities were growing. Bureaucracies were forming, and with them came the idea of detention. In England, Henry II's reforms in the late 1100s established royal prisons as part of the legal system. In France, royal and ecclesiastical prisons multiplied under the Capetians. Italy, with its powerful city-states like Florence and Venice, created some of the earliest structured jail systems. And in the Holy Roman Empire, cities like Nuremberg and Regensburg developed dedicated spaces to hold those awaiting trial or torture. But let's be clear, these were not clean, organized institutions. In London's Newgate Prison, founded in the 12th century, prisoners were crammed into dark, airless rooms. The historian John Stowe wrote that inmates died of hunger and filth, and that rats were so numerous they would bite flesh from sleeping men. In Paris, beneath the Châtelet, prisoners were held in dungeons that flooded in the winter and baked in the summer. Some cells had no light at all. In Nuremberg, whole cells were just that. In Avignon, under papal authority, prisoners were thrown into pits with no ladders and no doors. In Italy, records from Florence describe prisoners held underground in the Bargello, an administrative building that also served as a jail. The cells were so low you couldn't stand up, and many were chained directly to the walls. These were not places of order. They were places of chaos, disease, and despair, and yet these prisons held more than just criminals. In fact, most inmates weren't murderers or violent offenders. Many were debtors. Others were political opponents or peasants caught in disputes with their lords. Some were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. In 14th century Florence, more than half of all prisoners were detained over unpaid debts. In Prague and Krakow, people were jailed for refusing to pay taxes or for breaking religious fasts. Let's talk about one real case. In 1431, a French peasant girl named Joan was imprisoned by the English in Rouen. You might know her as Joan of Arc. She had led armies, claimed visions from God, and become a symbol of French resistance. Her prison was no ordinary cell. She was kept in a secular jail, tied up in irons, guarded by men, and denied access to clergy. Her captors feared her influence even in chains. She was interrogated repeatedly, and although torture was threatened, it was never used, perhaps because her mental resilience scared them more than any weapon. Eventually, she was burned at the stake, but her imprisonment was a key part of her downfall. Like many others, she didn't die in prison, but her time there ensured she would. Justice in the Middle Ages wasn't blind. It was selective. Brutally so. The wealthy could bribe jailers for better food, cleaner cells, or even for freedom. The poor, They rotted. In England, it was common for jailers to charge inmates for everything: straw to sleep on, food, even lighter chains. If you couldn't pay, you went without. In France, there were recorded cases of breathing fees. That was money just for being allowed to live. And in the Holy Roman Empire, prisoners were sometimes kept in darkness for weeks without trial, unless someone paid to move their case forward. Prisons also served political purposes. In the Tower of London, kings and queens used imprisonment as a statement of power. Anne Boleyn was held there before her execution. So was her daughter, the future Elizabeth I. In Florence, political enemies of the Medici were often taken to underground cells and simply disappeared. The same happened in Avignon, where critics of the papal court were locked away beneath the papal palace. Their names were struck from records. Their trials never held. So what made someone torturable? Not every prisoner was tortured, but the threat of torture was ever present. It wasn't about truth, it was about confession. In Spain, the Inquisition used the strapado, tying someone's arms behind their back and dropping them from a height. In Germany, thumbscrews crushed bones slowly. In England and Italy, the rack stretched bodies until ligaments tore. Sometimes this was all done just to produce a name, a lie, or a scream. Torture was part of the legal process, written into law, accepted by society, and justified as divine purification. But conditions and practices weren't the same everywhere. In England, prisons like Newgate and the Fleet were infamous for overcrowding and corruption. Prisoners often bribed guards for basic survival, and jailers openly demanded fees from visitors and families. In France, royal prisons like the Conciergerie in Paris held both commoners and nobles, especially during times of unrest. Records show that conditions were so poor during the 100 Years' War that entire groups of prisoners died of disease before facing trial. In the Holy Roman Empire, especially in cities like Cologne and Nuremberg, punishment was increasingly standardized under local law codes. Prisons were used more for pre-trial detention, while public executions served as the real display of justice. Meanwhile, in Italy, particularly in Florence and Venice, the urban elite used prisons to silence rivals. Some prisoners were held in underground vaults, deliberately starved or denied light for weeks. The system was not designed for rehabilitation, it was built to control. Different rulers and cities had different motives. Some wanted to demonstrate mercy, others raw power. In Aragon and Castile, during the early phases of the Spanish Inquisition, imprisonment and torture went hand in hand. Inquisitors used jails not only to contain heresy, but to break people mentally. And yet, despite all this brutality, many medieval prisons functioned as systems of social management. In some cities, a poor prisoner could be released early if they agreed to leave town. In others, wealthy merchants paid the bail for friends or relatives, essentially buying their freedom. Justice was flexible but never fair. So what can we learn from all of this? Medieval prisons weren't designed to rehabilitate. They didn't aim to fix people. They were used to isolate, punish, threaten, and sometimes destroy. They were a part of a broader system, one that accepted cruelty as a price for control. And yet, even in that darkness, there are glimmers of human resilience, letters scratched into walls, prisoners who escaped and others who survived and told their stories. Some of the principles used back then like pre-trial detention, solitary confinement, or charging inmates for basic needs, still echo in modern systems. That should make us uncomfortable, because while the walls are cleaner today, the shadows they cast are familiar. The past is darker than you think. Subscribe for more and step back into the Middle Ages with me. I'll see you next time.